So I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Okay, thank you, Denise, and
Thank you.
thanks for inviting me. This is the third or fourth time that I've spoken with you and the library, and hopefully we don't get knocked off because of a thunderstorm. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Baseball in the American culture, things have changed in the American culture, and baseball is no longer the king of sports, or the king of sports feeding into movies and magazines and books and culture, and Yogi isn't there anymore either. Let me give you some background on me. My name is Evan Weiner. I actually went to Ramapo College right down the road, but I was working professionally. And the good thing about Ramapo College was a professor by the name of Jim McCarthy. He basically taught me how to speak without an accent. But in 1971, I was going to Spring Valley High School, which is about 9 miles from where you are right now. And I had a teacher by the name of Joe Dionisio, who I still see at the State Line Diner. Well, we did before the coronavirus, where the old Spring Valley and Ramapo, New York high school teachers used to meet once a month. And I'm in 11th grade. It's September of 1971. And Joe looks at me and he says, "Student, you have a good voice. How would you like to be on radio?" "Yeah, I want to be on radio the worst way possible." And I was. I was on WRKL 910 on the AM dial, 1,000 watts of power, comes in perfectly in Mahwah, since you're only about 8 miles from where the tower is. And it was one of the worst shows I've ever done, but it was the opening for me. I did it with Gene Delisio and Doris Chan. Joe also opened the door for me, and I was able to work doing stringing work at Spring Valley High School with, hold on while I let somebody in, with the Journal News of Nyack and the Bergen Record. I had 3 stints with the Bergen Record, one during high school, one after I graduated college, and Peter Grad, who does photography and has had exhibits in libraries around New Jersey, brought me back in to do op-ed pieces, and then they nuked the whole op-ed department at the Bergen Record. In 1978, I was working for WGRC Radio. That was in Nanuet, New York, by the old Nanuet Mall. And Steve North hired me. And I had graduated college. I was 21, year ahead. And Steve said, "You got to work on Saturdays," which was fine with me, because Rockland Community College was doing a speaker series. And by the time I was 22, I had interviewed Ralph Nader and Julian Bond. But this is March of 1978. I'm still 21 years old. And Steve said, "You have to go and cover a Democratic fundraiser, New York State Democratic fundraiser in Nyack at the Tappan Zee Townhouse." And I said, "Sure, what time?" It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I get there, and yeah, I'm 21, big bushy hair and arrogant as could be, because I'm 21 and out of college, like a lot of other 21-year-olds. And I walk into the Tappan Zee Townhouse, and in walks this obscure assemblyman who, I don't know if you've heard of him or not, Jerry Nadler. So Jerry Nadler walks in, and then Mario Cuomo is running for lieutenant governor, and he comes in with his wife, Matilda. He's got his teenage son with him, Andrew. He's got his little kid with him, Chris, among the other Cuomos who were there. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan came in. Hugh Carey, who was running for governor for New York at the time, comes in as well. And then there's this tall guy. He looked like a movie star. He was really good looking. He had the brownish, grayish, sandy hair and angular features, about 6'4", and he walks right to me. And he looks at me and he says, "I like you." I'm looking and said, "I know that guy. I know that guy. I watch Batman. He's the mayor of Gotham City, John Lindsay." And John Lindsay tells me I'm running for Senate, state of New York in 1980. And I got my scoop. There I am, 21 years old, got my first scoop. So I run back to my radio station. I'm done for the day. File it with the Associated Press, file it with United Press International. Then I get a call from WNEW in New York. Some of you probably listened to WNEW at one point with Ted Brown, William B. Williams, and those people. And it's Henry Marcotte on the phone, and he says, "Would you like to do that story for us?" I said, "The Lindsay story." I said, yeah, how much you gonna pay me? 10 bucks, sold. And with that, 21 years old, I am doing news features on a 50,000-watt New York City radio station, WNEW, and that lasted until 1981 when they gutted the news department. My last story was the Brinks robbery in Nanuet, New York in October of 1981. So that's a little background on me. That guy, we weren't friends, we were acquaintances, and I'm very happy that I was an acquaintance of Yogi Berra, and that was the back room at Yogi's place. And when you talk about baseball and the culture, Yogi Berra gets right to the top of the list. Baseball and the American culture, particularly in the 1950s and the 1960s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and into the 21st century. He's still doing commercials with a duck in the 21st century. But he was a very nice man, and he was very kind to me, and I used to speak at his museum quite a bit. And he would come to every one of my talks, and after every one of my talks, he would come up to me, pat me on the back, and say, good job, kid, good job. Yogi was an essential character in baseball, in the American culture. But he was playing in the 1950s. And in 1954, there was a French philosopher by the name of Jacques Barzun. And he was writing in the book, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And he made a suggestion: don't go to a major league game, go see an industrial league game, or better yet, go see a high school game, because that's where you really learn about baseball, down on the high school level. Major league games are fine, but baseball is so Americana, as he pointed out in 1954. And of course, Yogi, by 1954, was a household word or name. Casey at the bat? Well, Casey at the bat is one of the first pieces of the culture. That is a slide from a Disney cartoon from 1946. Jerry Colonna voiced Casey, and Casey, of course, strikes out. Now, Casey, who is Casey, and what's the significance of the poem? Well, let's talk about Ernest Thayer. He was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1883. Ernest Thayer and I have one thing in common. He wrote columns for the San Francisco Examiner in the 19th century, and I wrote columns for the San Francisco Examiner in the 21st century. Now, I'm not sure if Thayer was actually proud of this little poem that he wrote called Casey at the Bat. It was printed on June 3rd, 1888, and there is no author's credit. And the poem is pretty simple. Casey has a chance to win the game, gets up there, and he strikes out. And in fourth grade, back in 1964-65, I had Miss Alexander as my teacher, PS 151 in Woodside in Queens, and she had the blue hair, and she had the white blouse, and she had the blue skirt and the napkin stuck here in case her nose ran. And she gave us an assignment. The assignment was analyze Casey at the bat. It's baseball season anyway. And I analyzed it pretty good. I thought he was a lousy player. He struck out, chance to win the game. You know, no, that's not what it's about. That's not what it's about. It's about man's failures. It's about man's failures. How do we know it's about man's failures? Thayer didn't even take credit for the poem. And we don't even know who Casey is. Maybe King Kong Kelly. Maybe somebody in Stockton. After all, the minor league team in Stockton, when they get back on the field, presumably in 2021, is known as the Mudville Nine. No joy in Mudville. The mighty Casey is struck out. It would take Thayer 7 years before he took credit for the poem, and he did so at a Harvard class reunion in 1885. But it only would take about 6-7 weeks before this guy, Heather Hopper, remember Heather Hopper, the actress and the gossip columnist? Well, that's her father, DeWolf Hopper, and he gets a hold of this poem, and he finds something in this poem that he likes, and he decides, you know what? I'm going to go out on the vaudeville stage. He was an actor. I'm going out on the vaudeville stage, and I am going to act out the part of Casey striking out. So it becomes a vaudeville act for the first time on August 14th, 1888. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times on the vaudeville stage. Silent movie. He recorded it. 10,000 times over his career, which stretched until the 1920s. So he was doing this for well over 30 years by the time he made a silent movie. But he wasn't the only guy that was doing Casey at the Bat. Now, that is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And I fell in love with that cylinder because that cylinder, it spins around and around and around and it makes noise. And I happen to listen to John Philip Sousa's band and playing on there. But in the 1890s, the gay 90s, if you wanted to hear Casey at the Bat, it was possible to hear Casey at the Bat on one of those cylinders back in the day. And it was because of this guy, Russell Hunting. Russell Hunting was a voice actor, and he also played around with sounds. And in 1893, and again in 1898, with a heavy Irish brogue, he played Casey at the Bat. It was also recorded for Edison back in, Edison by John Kaiser in 1905. And Hooper recorded it for Victor. Not RCA Victor yet, but Victor. That didn't come out until 1906, and I'm not sure Victor had Nipper the dog at that point, listening to his master's voice. So Hopper is recorded, Kaiser is recorded, Hunting's recorded twice. Now, if you want to listen to Kaiser, you want to listen to Hopper, hey, there's the perfect thing that you listen to, this old Victrola. This is actually Sagway, Quebec. I speak on cruise ships. I'm walking through Sagway, Quebec, and there's this guy with all this junk in his garage, and he's inviting everybody to come in to see his junk, which really isn't junk. That thing actually works. So if you cranked it up and you threw the Hopper record down, you could hear it on something like that. Hopper would commit the verse to early short subject, a film by Lee DeForest. That would be in 1923. Also another silent movie that was silent with Hopper. Wallace Beery, 1927, did a silent film. Jerry Colonna, who was Bob Hope's second banana. Where's Yehuda? That was his famous thing on Bob Hope. Recorded a rendition for the Disney cartoon, Casey at the Bat, 1946. Jackie Gleason performed it on his CBS TV show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings. George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin did it for charity, the Tampa Police Benevolent Association. I'm not sure if Billy was working as manager for George at that point or was in between jobs at that point, but they raised money with George and Billy doing Casey at the Bat in Tampa way back when in the 1980s. That sign, and I'm going to ask if you want to throw it in chat. You could type it out in chat and I'll read the question or whatever you want to say. Do you know what that sign's all about? Do you have any idea what that sign's all about? Give me a couple seconds if you want to comment about that sign. That sign was in the New York City subway system in 1908, probably next to Dr. Zinsmore's acne cure. And if you ever been in the subway, you could see 5,000 signs of Dr. Zinsmore. But anyway, wait, we got somebody who might be wanting to say something. Giants game. Yeah, Giants game. It was a Giants game going out to the Polo Grounds. And there was a songwriter by the name of Norwith, Jack Norwith, saw the sign, ball game today at the Polo Grounds, and then began imagining, hey, you know what? I might be able to write a song on this. And he does write the song. And it's called Take Me Out to the Ball Game and Take Me Out to the Crowd. I work with that guy, Harry Carey. What you don't see in that picture is Harry's 6 best friends named Bud, as in Budweiser. He believed in promoting the sponsor's product, even though the sponsor nearly killed him in 1969, Gussie Bush. But that's another story. But in between the top of the 7th and the bottom of the 7th inning, at every home game in Wrigley Field, Harry Carey sung the sung Take Me Out to the Ball Game, the verse that you know, and he sung it rather badly. And to this day, I don't know how they're going to do it once the season starts in a couple of days. I don't know how they're going to do it in an empty ballpark, but they bring in guests, and they are supposed to sing it as badly as you could sing a song, keeping in tradition with Harry Carey. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root, root, root for the home team. They don't win. It's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Second stanza. There's a first stanza. There's a third stanza. The song is written by Norwith and his partner Albert von Tilzer. The odd thing about this is it's written in 1908 is that neither Norwith nor von Tilzer ever saw a baseball game. They had no idea what was going on, but they dreamed up the story. They dreamed up the story about Katie Casey, who presumably is from the Lower East Side, or maybe even from Brooklyn. But if she's going to a Giants game, she must be from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so they come up with this entire story. The story is Katie Casey is going out. I don't know if she's going out with her husband or her boyfriend or just a friend. And baseball games used to start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And they're on the subway, presumably on the subway, because it's where the song emanates from. And they're going back and forth what they should be doing on this particular day. And she wants to go to the ball game. She wants to go to the ball game. And this is kind of odd in 1908 because women did not go to ball games in 1908. It was thought to be very unladylike because baseball players were a bunch of ruffians. There has been some suggestion that this may have been the first women's lib song ever committed to vaudeville. At least the suggestion last year in the Washington Post by a writer about Katie Casey. Katie is getting very upset, and she can't take it anymore, and she belts out, take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd. Now, we don't know what happened with Katie and her boyfriend, Katie and her husband, Katie and her friend, whoever he is. But we do know a couple things about Katie Casey. She's young. She knows all the players. She knows all the players, but they're not wearing numbers on their back, nor are they wearing their names on their back, but she knows all the players and she knows how to get them going. But we don't know if it's in the Susan Sarandon way of getting players going, Baseball Annie and Bull Durham, or if she just leads a rousing cheer of take me out to the ball game. That's never answered. But anyway, these guys write the song, and Norwood's wife is Nora Bayes. And Nora Bayes is on the vaudeville circuit, and she popularizes the song along with Shine On Harvest Moon. If you look at songs written in 1908, you don't have very many of them sung in mass gatherings or remembered in mass gatherings, as a matter of fact. So that's probably the most popular song ever written in 1908, and Nora Bayes would perform it on the vaudeville stage. Norwood would finally see a baseball game in 1928. It took Von Tilzer until 1940 to see a baseball game. He didn't see a baseball game until 1940. Baseball did not embrace this song either. It wasn't until the 1934 World Series that it was played. Now, that guy there, Groucho, this is Night at the Opera, which is a great movie, but not my favorite Marx Brothers movie. My two favorite Marx Brothers movies are Duck Soup and Horse Feathers. It's a good movie. And Groucho's character and Margaret Dumont's character go to Italy because Margaret Dumont is the patron of the opera, and she wants this particular tenor to sing at the opera. Groucho, being Groucho, runs into Chico and Harpo, and they have a singer, and Groucho is convinced that that singer, Jack Jones' father, Alan Jones, is the one that should sing there. So they stow away. You might remember the famous stowaway scene in Night at the Opera. They get to the opera in New York. It's convoluted. And they have to knock out the guy, the tenor that Margaret Dumont wanted, which they do, and prop up the other guy, and they have to kill some time. So Chico and Harpo put the sheet music, take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, in the orchestra pit. So they go from the overture to take me out to the ball game. Groucho jumps down and starts selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks to the crowd so they could kill time, so the other tenor could go on there. So Take Me Out to the Ball Game was a key part of this movie. Harpo Marx returned to the song in 1955 on the I Love Lucy show, playing it on the harp. It's been played in numerous movies, numerous TV shows, and radio as well. And probably Spotify has it as well these days. I do cruise ships. I speak on cruise ships when they're allowed to go out. And I have some comic friends, John Joseph and Max Torcelli. And one day we're sitting around talking about Abbott and Costello and Take Me Out to the Ball Game because John Joseph, with his partner at the time, Johnny B, did a variation of Take Me Out to, of Who's On First. And we're talking about Who's On First. And one of the odd things as we talked was the routine that Abbott and Costello did here is called rounders. That's what it was. You had the straight man or the smart aleck, and you had the stooge. And the straight man's job, his entire job, is to confuse the stooge, who keeps asking question after question after question. It was a common form of comedy back then. Back in the 19-teens, 20s, and 30s on the vaudeville stage and the burlesque stage, or both burlesque stages. The burlesque, if you spell it B-U-R-L-E-S-Q-U-E, that means it's family show. If it's spelled with a K, clothes come off on women. But Bud Abbott worked the burlesque circuit in the 1920s, might have done a variation of this. Now, it's called rounders. And a few years ago, I was up at the Berkshires, and there's a baseball museum dedicated to Jack Chesborough, who played at the turn of the 20th century. There is an article in the local paper about the game of baseball being played in 1792 or so up in the Berkshires. Baseball comes out of something called, it's an English game. That makes sense because the people who mostly settled the country were Englishmen. And Canada as well. So this style that they use is called rounders. So it's kind of ironic that here you got two cases of rounders, baseball coming out of rounders and the routine coming out of rounders. So Costello is supposed to play the idiot, and Bud Abbott plays the straight man. So we got to talking, John Joseph, Max Torcelli, and I. And John Joseph brought up the fact that more than likely this routine was written by a guy by the name of Michael Musto, and he couldn't take it anywhere with him. It's like Jerry Lewis. He took everything out of the Borscht Belt, and until he met Dean Martin, he was nothing. He really was nothing. He was just looking around for work, and then the two of them hit it. So you got John Joseph saying, I'm pretty sure, and John Joseph, some of you might remember this name, Alan King. Alan King was John Joseph's mentor, the comedian that was always on the Ed Sullivan Show. He had an apartment in Jackson Heights and could get over to the Ed Sullivan Show when somebody didn't show up. But anyway, he said, no, of course he paid $15 for the routine. And Max Torcelli, my other comedian friend, said, no, we're comedians. We steal everything. So we don't know, first of all, we don't know if Musto really wrote it, but it's assumed Musto wrote it. We don't know if they paid for it. They may have paid for it, they may not have paid for it, but they get it around 1936. And they start working on it. It's a rounders routine, and they continue to work on it. Abbott may have done a variation of that in the 1920s before meeting Costello on the burlesque tour. So they get it. John Grant, Costello's writer, is helping out. So is Will Glickman. Abbott and Costello are regulars on the Kate Smith Show. And in March of 1938, they debut the routine. Who's On First? It's a smash hit. It puts Abbott and Costello on another planet. And Abbott and Costello would be doing movies, eventually TV. And eventually they would perform at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt, for Harry Truman, for Dwight Eisenhower. They performed it in the movies, that and the other skit, Niagara Falls. They were on radio, they were on TV, and Abbott and Costello by 1956 become the first non-baseball people or non-people or people not connected with baseball. Now, there were some writers and others who helped set up rules like back in the 1840s, but they're the first of the non-baseball people ever to be honored in baseball's Hall of Fame. So here we are, about 2007, 2008, and Vin Scully, the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer, who started with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1950, is doing the play-by-play as he normally did on TV. And the first 2 innings, it was a simulcast, both TV and radio. And he looks at his monitor and he sees this image. And he says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first? Who is on first? And the Dodgers had a player from South Korea by the name of who's on first base. Question answer, who's on first? There was a Watt on second. The Watt played second base for the Washington Senators or Nationals in the 1920s. But he preceded the routine, at least as far as Abbott and Costello. I know for one thing, I know this for sure. There was never a third baseman. Never a third baseman. I don't give a darn. Never a third baseman like that. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago, my wife and I decided to go up to Hyde Park because I had to ask Franklin Roosevelt some questions. I do a talk on the 1936 Olympics, which is kind of unique because I worked with Marty Glickman. I knew Sam Stoller, who were replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf in the 1936 4x4 relay in Berlin. And I interviewed Gretel Bergmann, who is the best athlete from Germany and in Europe in the 1930s, who was denied the chance at running or doing her track and field events in the Berlin Olympics. So I want to ask Roosevelt a few questions. One, why did you allow the American team to go to Berlin in 1936 to give Hitler some legitimacy? I do another talk called The Early Days of TV. And in the early days of TV in America, the first person on TV in America was Franklin Roosevelt. So I want to ask him about that. And then I want to ask him about the green light letter, which allowed baseball to play during World War II. Franklin and Eleanor, perfect hosts, very gracious hosts, a little stiff. The books, they recommended read the books, but couldn't do that also because it was a little stiff. But I did get my answers to all the questions. And there's Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And after Pearl Harbor is bombed on December 7th, 1941, Landis doesn't know exactly what baseball should do because in 1918, the season was cut short, not because of the flu. That would come a little later in the year. It was cut short because of World War I. The American League owners wanted to end the season September 1st. National League owners said, no, let's keep on playing. The good thing for the Boston Red Sox, they kept playing, and they won the World Series, Babe Ruth throwing all those scoreless innings before he became Babe Ruth, the home run hitter. So Landis sends a letter to FDR, and the letters are there in the library. And Roosevelt says, I honestly feel that would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation that doesn't last over 2 or 2.5 hours. Franklin's been dead since 1945, so he hasn't seen any games lately, and which could be got for very little cost. Well, maybe in the Roosevelt's case, but it costs a lot of money to see a baseball game when you can see one. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. Of course, we have blackouts during World War II, but in places like Detroit, which is probably the westernmost part of the Eastern time zone back then, it didn't get dark till about 9:15. In the summer, so they could have night games and then put lights on afterwards. So Roosevelt says, go ahead, play baseball. And I was talking one day to Dan Rooney, who's the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the late Dan Rooney, and he was telling me with that letter, allowing baseball to play, the National Football League said, if baseball could play, we could play. Baseball was the king of sports, and it was going to play. We could get out there as the NFL and play. National Hockey League kept playing even though they had very few players. The Brooklyn Americans went out of business. And there was no NBA in those days. So there was boxing in those days. But as Rooney said, baseball said, if Roosevelt said to baseball, it's okay, we could play. And they did. And it was the war years. People like Pete Gray, one-armed Pete Gray, played baseball. And Hank Greenberg was the first player to enlist into World War II. Movies, the movies, they're going to make a big star out of me. Well, the big star here, of course, is Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth did 10 movies. He started in 1920. His last movie was Pride of the Yankees. In the 1920s silent film, Heading Home, Babe stars as a baseball player. Guess he was typecast. He also starred in Babe Comes Home. That doesn't exist anymore because no print has survived over the years because of the way they made the prints that disintegrated eventually. He makes a cameo in the Harold Lloyd silent movie in 1928 called Speedy. That's the movie where Harold Lloyd is hanging from a clock. Altogether, Ruth was in 10 movies, with the last one being Pride of the Yankees. But the first star from baseball to go over to the movies, the Broadway stage, was a New York Giants infielder by the name of Mike Donlin. And he was a pretty good player during the dead ball era. He was the baseball idol of Manhattan. He was a career .333 hitter, which was pretty good, but he took multiple breaks from baseball because he'd make more money on the stage in vaudeville. He retired in 1914. He went right into the movies, did about 53 movies. The first movie, typecast right off the bat, which also featured his manager, John McGraw. McGraw was in a few movies as well. I don't know what kind of actor he was. Very few of these movies survive. But John J. McGraw, the manager of the New York Giants, also did some movies. But Mike Donlin was the first real star from baseball on Broadway, vaudeville, and in the movies. Now, that is Lou Gehrig. Lou Gehrig in 1938 was in this highly forgettable movie called Rawhide. And it had a stupid plot. Lou Gehrig, born in New York, went to Columbia University, played with the New York Yankees, and lived in New Rochelle. All of a sudden, Lou Gehrig decides he's got to give it all up. And in this movie, he's at Grand Central Terminal, announces his retirement from baseball. Why? Well, because he's fed up. He's had enough. He's all stressed out, and he's going to go to Montana. He's going to Montana, and he is going to spend the rest of his life in solitude, not with his wife, but his sister. They bought some land in Montana. Like I said, it's not much of a movie, but it does provide a medical purpose because Lou Gehrig is diagnosed with ALS in 1939, and the doctors were able to see his movements because, you know, unless you went to a baseball game, there's very little film of Lou Gehrig actually playing baseball, and certainly no. Well, there was TV in 1939, but it was in May of 1939, Columbia playing Princeton over at Baker Bowl. Video is frozen, sound okay. All right, that happens. We just had a big thunderclap behind me. So hopefully I'll just go on here. So you're frozen on Lou Gehrig? Okay, I don't know if you can see anything after Lou Gehrig, but I'll keep going anyway. Lou Gehrig is in this movie, and the doctors take a look at this movie to see how he's doing. Has the screen moved? Just, I could see Lester, if you could tell me if the screen moved or not. Just put up a thumb if the screen moved. I take it that's a yes? Okay, hopefully the screen moved. Okay, good, thank you. So it's a 1938 Western. The doctors look at it and they could tell from the way he moved in the movie how rapidly the disease was taking over his body. Okay, only I'm frozen, that's fine. We had a lightning bolt that just went past. Bugs Bunny is my hero. Everything I've learned in life, I think I've learned from Warner Brothers cartoons, including classical music. And this cartoon, Baseball Bugs, Bugs is a heckler. You know, Bugs was the perfect cartoon comedian. There wasn't a better cartoon comedian than Bugs. So he's heckling the Gas House Gorillas. He's getting on their nerves, and he can beat them with one arm tied behind his back. And the Gas House Gorillas manager says, okay, go ahead. And he does. He eventually beats the Gas House Gorillas, taking over from the Teetotalers. That baseball was important in cartoons. There were Casey at the Bat and other cartoons about baseball. Some of the movies. This is A League of Their Own. That is Madonna being held by Rosie O'Donnell. Gina Davis has got the chest protector on. Tom Hanks is in this movie, playing a character based on Jimmy Fox, who was a manager in this league. This league was founded by Phil Wrigley around 1943 or so. It lasted about 9 years, all women. And Casey Kendall, who played with the Montreal Expos in the 1980s. And I talked to him, rather 1990s, I was talking to him because he was the technical advisor on this movie. And he said his mother played in the league. And so his mother was helping him advise the people who were putting together this movie to make it as authentic as possible. Casey was a second baseman, utility infielder with the Montreal Expos back then. And I have a friend who's friends with Jim Lovell, the Apollo 13 astronaut. And Tom Hanks, of course, played Jimmy Fox in this, or the Jimmy Fox character in this movie as the manager. And he was telling me that Lovell is on a press tour with the Apollo 13 movie that Ron Howard put out. And Lovell was telling him, he says, I expected questions about Apollo 13, but most of the questions were, was Tom Hanks a nice guy? He said he was. And so Tom Hanks is in this movie as well. There is Pride of the Yankees, written by Paul Gallico, the former New York Daily News sports editor, who also wrote the So Goose stories. And there was Gary Cooper, who was right-handed, never played baseball, and all the scenes were done with a mirror to make it look left-handed. So he's getting some sort of other award in this movie. And there is Kevin Costner, one of the many baseball roles he did with Tim Robbins. Is, of course, Bull Durham in 1988. And Max Patkin, the clown prince of minor league baseball, was in that movie. And I was with Max Patkin one night back in the 1980s. And he said, I finally made the movies, but I didn't get the girl being Susan Sarandon. And Kevin Costner, of course, was living with her, and she broke in the best player on the Bull Durham team. And it was the $1 Million Arm and 10 Cents Head. And he was modeled, he being Tim Robbins' character. Ron Shelton wrote the movie, and he modeled him after a guy named Steve Delkowski, who never played in the major leagues, but could throw a baseball at 100 miles an hour, could strike out everybody and walk everybody. Never made it to the major leagues. Crash Davis, the veteran catcher, who's down there trying to help these guys make it to the major leagues. There's Jerry Lewis talking to Pee Wee Reese, and that is the Geisha Boy that was done after the Dodgers. Any Brooklyn Dodger fans in here? Am I allowed to say Los Angeles Dodgers? Is O'Malley still a curse word? Anyway, Jerry Lewis explaining to Pee Wee Reese what he wants done in the movie The Geisha Boy. Robert Redford, he was in the movie The Natural. There's Costner again talking to Joe Jackson in the Field of Dreams. The Yankees and Chicago White Sox were supposed to play in the 2020 Field of Dreams game. They're still planning to do it, but the St. Louis Cardinals will take the Yankees spot against the Chicago White Sox. And there is Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane, the smartest man in baseball. All you have to do is ask Billy Beane. He will tell you that. Stanford guy. And this, Michael Lewis's Moneyball. And it's all about the Oakland A's and Beane's approach to putting a team together for the Oakland A's. And there's Walter Matthau, who never did anything bad in the movies. He was a great, great actor. And he played with Jack Lemmon the same role in 3 different type movies: The Fortune Cookie, The Odd Couple, and Grumpy Old Men. Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bell Bonds. And Major League, Charlie Sheen and the Cleveland Indians. Chief Wahoo has been gone for a while. The Indians ownership got rid of Chief Wahoo 2 years ago. You can still get Wahoo-related material in only Cleveland. And that nickname may be going. Yesterday, Paul Dolan, who is one of the owners of the Indians, met with some of his players about, hey, should we or should we not change the name of our team? Yesterday, or 2 days ago, the Edmonton Eskimos of the Canadian Football League dropped Eskimos And of course, Washington dropped its name in the NFL. Some of the movies: Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield. That was done in Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. Why? Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pirates at the time. Bob Hope was part owner of his hometown Cleveland Indians. In 1977, Danny Kaminsky, who my mother-in-law's dentist was Danny Kaye's father back in the Bronx. And as a kid or a teenager, he'd come in and do routines to entertain people as they were getting drilled, according to my mother-in-law, who was born in 1921. Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, Moneyball. There was a movie with Tom Selleck about Japanese baseball. There are all kinds of movies out there. I'm not sure if any of the new movies besides Moneyball will get that classic name put to it. Is Homer Simpson in baseball's Hall of Fame? Yes or no? Don't answer it now, but if you want to put it in chat, you can put it in chat. Cartoons: Homer Simpson scores the winning run. Springfield. The Springfield nuclear power plant beats former major leaguers in a game, and there's Smithers with the cup that they won, and there's Monty Burns and everybody else in the Simpsons cast. And again, here's a question: is Homer Simpson in the Hall of Fame, baseball's Hall of Fame? Yes or no? There's Sandy Koufax signing an autograph, and I'm not sure if it's going to Mr. Ed or Wilbur Allen Young. Sandy Koufax was on the Mr. Ed show when Mr. Ed tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Herman Munster tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Here's Leo DeRocher. Leo happens to stumble upon Herman playing in a yard or park near the Munster's home at 1313 Mockingbird Lane some morning. Now, if you knew anything about Leo, the only time he woke up in the morning is if there was an afternoon game. 3 o'clock in the afternoon was morning for him, so that kind of, the Munsters, but kind of knocks that out. But, the whole thing is Leo's the third base coach with the Dodgers. He has no authority to sign players, but he signs Herman to a contract. Herman could hit a baseball. Problem is, Herman is 7'4", weighs 560 pounds. He can connect with a baseball, but if he slid into second base, whoever's covering second base is going in the outfield. If he collides with a foul ball or chasing a fly ball, that other guy is going to go flying. So the Dodgers have to release him. But it's not the end of Herman's sports career on that show. Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch happens to stumble upon the same block. Herman is playing with his son, Eddie Wolfgang Munster, and he's kicking a football, and Elroy Hirsch is about ready to sign him. Leo comes out of the bushes. Again, don't do it, Elroy. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. So Leo was on the Munsters. That is Al Ferrara along with Jim Lefevre. Al Ferrara is on the right. Al Ferrara, who is a Dodger. Oh, you can't see this because I've frozen. Al Ferrara said that he knew he made it to the major leagues because he saw his picture on a baseball card. Al Ferrara of the Los Angeles Dodgers with Gilligan there, who is worried about having his head shrunk. I once asked Frenchie Jim Lefevre, I said, you visited the island, the Harlem Globetrotters visited the island, people visited the island. How come you never told anybody there were the castaways there? He said, and why ruin it? I guess he had a point. It's John Roseborough, who is in a whole bunch of television shows. Walter O'Malley appeared with the Rifleman star and the former Brooklyn Dodger first baseman Chuck Connors in an episode of Brandon in 1965. Willie Davis, he acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front and in The Flying Nun with Sally Field. Johnny Roseborough appeared Dragnet in 1968. That's a typo there. Brooks Law, Kraft Suspense Theater. He was also on Mr. Ed and Experiment in Terror. So baseball players were embraced when they got to Los Angeles. Baseball in the culture, particularly the television culture of the 1960s. But in the 1950s, there was this guy. To the left, he is Phil Silvers. And his show is known by one of 3 titles. You'll Never Get Rich, The Phil Silvers Show, or the Sergeant Bilko Show. Anybody know who the guy is on the right? Anybody want to guess who the guy is on the right? I'll give you 10 seconds if you want to type in an answer, because you probably don't know who he is, but if I mention the name, some of you who are baseball fans might. Okay, I see no response, so I will tell you that is Steve Bilko. Steve Bilko, B-I-L-K-O, Nat Highkin, who was writing the Bilko Show, saw a baseball game and fell in love with the name Bilko. And here Phil Silvers meets Steve Bilko, who was a great minor league player, but not really a very good major league player. He was one of those tweeners who was too good for the minor leagues, but not good enough for the major leagues. He was playing with the Los Angeles Angels of the Pacific Coast League at that time. The Pacific Coast League also had a team in Hollywood. That was Humphrey Bogart's favorite team, the Hollywood Stars. And Bogey would do a PSA for baseball, that there's nothing better than being at a baseball game and eating a hot dog. He would do that over the finest steakhouse in Paris. Highkin would also write Car 54, Where Are You? And his character, Gunther Toody's favorite baseball player was Yogi Berra. And speaking of Yogi, Yogi and I were talking one day, and I said, "You're on the Bilko Show." He was on the Bilko Show. And I said, what were the Yankees doing in the middle of Kansas at Fort Baxter? Yeah, why were you there? We did the show in the Bronx. I said, yeah, I know, Yogi did it in the Bronx, but in the show, you were supposed to be at Fort Baxter in Kansas. What were you doing there? He said, no. I drove over the George Washington Bridge and got over. It was about 2 exits, and I went over into the studio. At that point, I decided, you know what? I was never going to get an answer. Never going to get an answer. There was also one other character of a television show that was named after a baseball player. Aaron Spelling did The Love Boat, and he was going through a list of baseball reference list, and he came across the name Moose Stubing, who was a coach with the Anaheim Angels in the 1980s. And that was it. Stubing, he loved the name, and the captain on the Love Boat became Captain Stubing, played by Gavin McLeod. I once asked Moose Stubing, I said, "Did you get any money for it?" He said, "No, but I know who the captain was named after." Moose Stubing was born in the Bronx and ended up in Texas, because it's where he played most of his career in minor league baseball. So it's the Donna Reed Show, the Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, the Munsters, Phil Silvers Show, also known as Bilko, or You Never Get Rich. Some of the baseball players appearing on those shows. And there's Bob Uecker, who I've known for a long, long time. And Bob Uecker was discovered by Al Hirt. By the way, here's an interesting trivia question, at least according to Uecker. Who had the highest lifetime batting average off of Sandy Koufax? You want to put it in there? I'll answer it, yes or no. Who had the highest batting average off of Sandy Koufax in their career? Well, you're looking at him. Bob Uecker, of all people. Bob Uecker, of all people. About 200 hitter lifetime. Uecker was a comedian, or tried to be a comedian, and he's bouncing around the South after he's playing with Atlanta. And he's playing on Bourbon Street, and Al Hirt the trumpet player, Al Hirt, happened to go into one of the clubs, and he thought Uecker was the funniest thing going. He thought Uecker was great, absolutely great. And he calls up Johnny Carson. He says, "Johnny, you got to have this guy on the show. You have to have him on the show. He's hysterical." Uecker, and of course, if you know anything about the Carson show back in the day, if you were called to sit in the seat next to Johnny as a comedian, that was it. You had made it. And Johnny calls him over, and during the break, Johnny leans over to Uecker. He says, "Is it true that you're a baseball player?" And Uecker says, "Well, you know, I have a baseball card, so I guess I am a baseball player." And so Bob Uecker made it. And Bob Uecker would eventually star in Mr. Belvedere, Miller Lite commercials. And Mr. Belvedere, his leading woman was Joanne Kearns, whose sister is Donna Deverona, the Olympic gold medalist from 1964 in swimming, who's a friend of mine. So Joanna Kearns and Bob Uecker were the stars of that show. This is Broadway, and whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And Lola wants you. And it's the story of Joe Hardy. Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil because Washington isn't winning. First in war, first in peace, last in the American League. Well, he sells his soul to the devil because they want to beat those damn Yankees. Everybody wants to beat the damn Yankees. Not much different from 1954 to 2020, except last year Washington won the World Series, and the Yankees in Washington will start the season tomorrow. There were two hit songs out of this. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets, and the other one was You Gotta Have Heart. Jerry Lewis played the devil on Broadway in the revival of Damn Yankees a long time afterwards. You Gotta Have Heart was not just sung on Broadway stage. No, it wasn't just sung there. It's also sung on the Ed Sullivan Show. And this is 1969, right after the amazing Mets beat Baltimore in 5 games to win the World Series. And there is Ed. He looks happy there. And in the front row is Art Shamsky, who's still around. In fact, I just joined an Art Shamsky club where he sits around and talks on a group. It's a friend of mine is running that. Next to him is Ron Swoboda, who's one of my favorite people and could tell a story. In the second row, from Seaver, you see Seaver at the end, 4 into the left is Tug McGraw, who I really enjoyed hanging out with. Tug McGraw, I'll give you a quick story about him. The Lieber and Stoller song, which is That All That Is? Sung by Peggy Lee. And he's saying to me one day, he says, I named my pitchers after things like Cuddy Stark, or Bo Derek. He said, I have a Bo Derek pitch. I said, what's that? He says, it's my slider because it has a little tail. And sexist, of course. And then he says, I got my Peggy Lee. And I said, what's that? He says, it's my fastball. And he says, when the hitters look at it, they say, is that all there is? Ed Sullivan, you don't know this. My cousin was of Stiller and Mirror, and Jerry and I used to talk about Ed Sullivan, and he had a sports background. He was a sports writer with the New York Daily News back in the 1920s. He was the ring announcer for the Golden Gloves at Madison Square Garden back then. So basically what you saw every week if you watched the Sullivan Show was a guy who thought he still was a ring announcer. Instead of introducing boxers, he was introducing stars. That's what he did. And that was according to Jerry Stiller, which is the perfect segue to this. The Seinfeld Show. And of course, my cousin Jerry played Frank Costanza. And a big part of this show was George Steinbrenner. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret about George. George liked the show. In fact, George liked the show so much that George decided, you know what? I'll tell you what. I'm going to send story ideas to Larry David, and let's see what Larry could do with it. And yes, he sent story ideas to Larry David. And here are the storylines suggested by George. Missing George. Now, this is a story about a guy who worked for American Shipbuilding in Tampa. And George always felt that he was in with the wrong crowd, and he always was a little worried about this guy. And this guy decides to go away for the weekend and really doesn't tell anybody that he's going to take a couple of days off. George pulls into the parking lot of the American ship. This is a Monday morning, and he notices the guy's car there. And he goes into the office, and he's saying hello to everybody, and he notices the guy isn't in his office, but his car is there. And this is going on for a couple hours. The guy still isn't there. And George begins to get worried. And he sends out he asks the Tampa police, all points bulletin to find this guy. This guy's just taking a couple of days off. That's all he's doing. He eventually comes back, but this turns into a show. And one of my favorite lines in this particular show is George Steinbrenner goes to see my cousin, Frank Costanza, And he knocks on the door, Mr. Costanza. Mr. Costanza, we think that George is dead. And Frank Costanza is processing this for a second. And he says, you traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You traded... And he did. He traded Jay Buhner, who had a pretty good career with Seattle, for Ken Phelps, who was a washout. Board meeting moved. One of the Yankees PR guys was telling me one day that they were having a board meeting. And the board meeting was at Yankee Stadium. And if you knew anything about George, George's food was your food. And George smelled some food. He said, where'd you get it? Down the restaurant, a couple blocks away. The entire board meeting is moved to the restaurant because George happened to smell the food. The different uniforms, that happened with the Tampa Yankees in Class A ball, where they had the cotton uniforms that shrunk. So those are the three storylines that came up from George Steinbrenner. George was actually on the show as well, but you never saw him because he was so bad acting. And this was a problem because George fancied himself as somebody who could be on TV. In fact, he was on Saturday Night Live, pitching George Steinbrenner, catching George Steinbrenner, first base George Steinbrenner, second base George Steinbrenner, third base George Steinbrenner, shortstop George Steinbrenner, left field George Steinbrenner, center field George Steinbrenner, right field George Steinbrenner, designated hitter George Steinbrenner, manager George Steinbrenner, general manager George Steinbrenner, owner George Steinbrenner. If you were around the Yankees at that point, you know George had his finger in every aspect of the Yankees. So he gets on the show, and he's acting with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. He's terrible. He's absolutely terrible. There's a clip up on YouTube if you want to see it, and you can judge for yourself and see why he's terrible. He probably thought he was Olivier, that he had to act, where they just wanted George. He actually did the scene in the show. It's terrible. Couldn't use it. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was an awkward situation. I did this talk at Bethpage, at the library of Bethpage out on the island, and there were Mets fans there. And they said, Seinfeld's a Met fan. How come you didn't put anything about the Mets? I said, okay. I know Keith Hernandez was on the show, so let's talk about Keith. And there is Keith, and there is Jerry, and there is George Costanza, Jason Alexander. And this particular show is where George Costanza thinks he's losing Jerry's friendship to Keith Hernandez, and they're at the gym together and a whole bunch of other things. And Hernandez would eventually become friends with Jerry Seinfeld to this day. But he didn't know who Jerry Seinfeld was when he was signed up for the show. Scott Boras, the super agent Scott Boras, calls Hernandez, and he says, because he was his agent, and he says, you want to be on Seinfeld? He said, what's that? And Scott said, well, you go out to L.A., they'll fly you first class, you'll be in the nice hotel for a week, and you get $15,000. Keith was ready to play himself on the show, and he did, and he was on the final show, the final episode of Seinfeld as well. You don't hear much about this these days, Wally Pipp. People aren't Wally Pipped anymore, but for a good part of the 20th century, Wally Pipp served as a warning. Don't call in sick. Somebody just might take your place, and you may never get your job back. And Wally Pipp allegedly had a headache. He really didn't have a headache. The Yankees decided they wanted to take a look at Lou Gehrig. Once they took a look at Lou Gehrig, Wally Pipp was out the door and on his way to Detroit. That was June 2nd, 1925. Don't call in sick. Someone else will do your job and could do it better. Cigarettes in baseball. That was a big thing. Cigarettes in baseball. And Old Gold cigarettes. And Babe, the Babe here looks like he's about ready to be electrocuted. Babe got throat cancer. And Babe did make a contribution to medicine. He was one of the first people ever given chemotherapy. Helped him a little bit, but he would die in 1948. Old Gold, smoother and better, presenting Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Not a cough in a carload. Babe Ruth, Old Gold cigarettes. Chesterfield, they sponsored the New York Giants baseball team, and I've seen the pictures of the Chesterfield scoreboard. ABC always buy Chesterfield. They satisfy. Well, they satisfied Bucky Harris manager of the world champion New York Yankees. And they also satisfied Bob Elliott, the most valuable player with the Boston Braves in the National League. And Ted Williams holding up the package of Chesterfield. And stay unusual. Looks like somebody stuck Chesterfield in a missing tooth. Joe DiMaggio, guarantee you that DiMaggio didn't pay that Chesterfield, didn't pay for it at all. As Phil Rizzuto once pointed out after DiMaggio retired in 1951, thank God I don't have to pay for his dinners anymore. And Ewell Blackwell, the Cincinnati Reds pitcher, when you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you will notice is their mildness. It's because of the right combination. World's best tobaccos, always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. And here's a Chesterfield story in the culture. October 3rd, 1951, Dodgers and Giants. The shot heard round the world. There was a guy in Brooklyn who was taping the game and taping Russ Hodges doing the game from the New York Giants viewpoint because he wanted to send a tape to Russ Hodges when Russ Hodges, the Giants announcer, would say, and the Brooklyn Dodgers are the National League pennant champion. Well, that didn't happen. Bobby Thompson hit the home run off Ralph Brankett. I got to know both of them. In fact, I got to know Brankett's brother, John, and his son-in-law, Bobby Valentine, who is now up at Sacred Heart University, where I speak occasionally. And anyway, to make a long story short, Giants win the pennant, Giants win the pennant, Giants win the pennant. The guy tapes it anyway, and he figures I'll be a good sport about it. I'll call the New York Giants and see if they want the tape, because for some strange reason, radio stations wiped out tapes. And back in those days, sometimes the only way you could get a broadcast, particularly in the 30s and 40s, is if somebody happened to tape it in a control room and kept it for themselves, or somebody taped it off the radio. That was taped off the radio. And the guy gets in touch with Hodges. Hodges gives him a carton of Chesterfields and $10. And with that, that call has been immortalized, totally immortalized over 69 years now. Dave Winfield was born on October 3rd, 1951. Yogi Berra. Joe Garagiola grew up with Yogi. They knew each other from the time they were 2 until the time Yogi died at the age of about 90, 88 years. And Joe once told me, he said, you know, when Yogi steps in it, he stepped in it. Yoo-hoo, that's chocolate water. That's vile stuff. But Yogi liked it. Mickey Mantle, who I did not like, a terrible interview. He liked it, though. Moose Gowron, one of my favorite people. Moose went to Arthur Murray at Casey Stengel's suggestion to learn footwork so he could play first base. And Moose was telling me that not only, he said, look at me, I look like a moose, just look at me. He said, but not only did I play first base, but I was sought after on the dance floor. I was the guy, because most guys couldn't dance. He could dance, and he met his wife on the dance floor because he went to Arthur Murray. Ellie Howard, who I didn't know. I didn't know Elston Howard at all. But they're all pitching Yoo-hoo now. And Yogi, here's the story on that. He meets the family in New Jersey at a country club, the Oliveris, and they cannot get this thing on the shelves. So they are out of curiosity say to Yogi, hey, Yogi, can you try this? And he does. And the Oliveris say, well, what do you think? He says, good, it's good stuff. And Yogi is on board. And of course, with Yogi, they're able to get the product on the shelves. Here's a Yogiism. One time I was in the office, as told to me by Dave Kaplan, who wrote some of Yogi's books, who was the curator for a while of the Yogi Berra Museum. One time I was in the office and the phone rang when no one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yogi sold craft Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. Yogi, I remember having a battery where I had to put water in when I was a teenager back in the 1970s. Yogi sold press-to-light high-level batteries. Needs water only 3 times a year. And there's Yogi selling the battery. And Yogi is selling because of a guy by the name of Frank Scott. Frank Scott was the traveling secretary of the New York Yankees. And Frank was at Yogi's house in Montclair one day. And he looks at his watch. Oh, my watch is broken. Yogi said, oh, no problem. You want a watch? I'll get you a watch. He said, what do you mean you get me a watch? He said, come with me. So he takes him to a room. He opens a drawer, and there are about 150 watches in there. And Frank said, where'd you get all these? And he said, well, whenever I speak, they give me a watch. Take whatever you want. And Frank said, you should get paid for this. And Frank becomes really the first agent who's pushing people out there. Although Babe Ruth had an agent and Red Grange had an agent, but he really pushed Yogi out there to sell everything. And Yogi was in the World Series every year, and Yogi didn't look like a baseball player. He was also on Bilko and other TV shows at the time. In the 70s, 80s, Miller Lite. Mark Thornberry was also in Miller Lite commercials. Don't know why I'm here. But Euchre was there, and John Madden was there, and Boomer Jeffrey Yogi, the Miller Lite All-Stars. Yogi also said, hey, you need a bike for Christmas? Tell your mom and dad. Shelby, the winner's bike. I like Shelby because it's the slickest, streamlined bike on the road. Jody and Marilyn Monroe. Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn Monroe. My friend, the late Mark Schneider, and his book might be in your library, Denise. It's called Morris and Me. He ghost wrote it for Morris Engelberger. And it's about 330 pages, and 11 of them were about Joe and Marilyn. And Marv used to go on around speaking. He went around northern New Jersey. He lived over right over the George Washington Bridge, up a little bit near Tenafly, not quite Tenafly. And anyway, Joe D. 11 pages of Joe D. and Marilyn, and he was able to crank out 50, 55-minute speeches. And guarantee you Joe didn't pay for that cigarette or that drink. Anyway, Joe D. and Marilyn, the love story of the baseball culture and the movie culture. January 14th, 1954, Joe D. and Marilyn elope. They go to San Francisco, Fisherman's Wharf. 10 months later, they get divorced. Marilyn filed for divorce, citing mental cruelty. Now, this is in 2017. This is Stamford, Connecticut. And there's 26-foot Marilyn. She goes around every summer. I guess she's not going around this summer, to various places and stays for the summer. Somebody had a sense of humor in Stamford, because that picture behind Marilyn, with her derriere facing the church, is the First Congressional Church. So if you walked out of the church, the first thing you saw was Marilyn's underwear. To her left was another church. So you got to see Marilyn on her side. And that is the scene that I've been told over the years that blew up the marriage between Marilyn and Joe D. And there are some stories about when they got home that night. I've never verified it, but I'll just leave it that there are some stories that were told to me by guys like Johnny Blanchard and others who were around the Yankees and heard all these stories. Anyway, Joe wanted, this is what Joe wanted in life. He wanted a wife who would stay home, wanted a wife who would cook him dinner, wanted a wife that wasn't making as much money as he was, wanted a wife who was less famous than he was. Marilyn was all four. All 4 boxes were checked. And that didn't work for Joe and Marilyn. Joe actually wanted to get back together with her by the early 1960s. He's also into conspiracy theories. He thought that the Kennedys knocked off Marilyn. And I was on a cruise in 2008 talking, and I met an LA detective, retired. And he told me he was at the scene, actually. He was working the entertainment sector. That included every Thursday night breaking up a fight between Sid Loft and Judy Garland, with Judy usually beating up Sid Loft. And they got tired of that, all the cops. And he said he was there, and she was just a junkie who mixed alcohol with pills. And that was basically it. There was nothing else to it. Song. Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt. We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel, which Joe is in. Joe from the 1940s. Did you see Jackie Hit That Ball? That's Duke Ellington. And Mickey by Teresa Brewer. Now, Simon and Garfunkel, Mrs. Robinson. The song starts out as just a da-da-da-da-da-da as incidental music in the movie The Graduate, but it would mature because people thought it could be fleshed out by Paul Simon to a song. And the song is initially called Mrs. Roosevelt, except Mike Nichols, who is the producer of The Graduate, said, no, it's now becoming Mrs. Robinson. And of course, the song, which you probably have heard thousands upon thousands of times, has the line, "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Nation turns its lonely eyes to you." Johnny Blanchard, who kept the flame going for the Yankees for a long time. Roger Maris was one of the guys he talked about a lot, and others. Repeated the story that he had heard from others about Joe and Paul meeting one day. Paul was singing national anthems with Art Garfunkel at Yankees games. And so Joe and Paul go out to dinner one night, and according to Blanchard's story, they meet, and Joe walks in, and he says, he's introduced to Paul Simon. He said, well, what do you mean? Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? I'm here. I'm with you. I haven't gone anywhere. I'm around. And so Paul decides he's going to go intellectual on them. Big mistake. And he starts talking about, well, I was looking for heroes, and there aren't real heroes to be found these days. And you left. I was 10 years old in 1951. I never saw you again. You just went away. I never got to see you again. And Joe said, but I'm here. I just did a commercial. I'm around. I haven't gone anywhere. At that point, Paul Simon is at the point where let's just enjoy dinner, and that's about it. We'll leave it at that. Now, he goes on the Dick Cavett show, he being Paul Simon. And he says, I didn't mean the lines literally. I thought of him as an American hero. In general, genuine heroes were in short supply. There were two people on that list for that song. One was Eleanor Roosevelt, the other was Ted Williams. Those were the two that Paul Simon thought about in that song. He said of DiMaggio, he accepted the explanation. He thanked me, we shook hands, said goodnight, and Paul was left with the bill, probably. Now, you probably know this, Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio did not like one another. In fact, they hated one another. Joe is jealous of Mickey. Mickey is 1951, he's 20 years old. He is a beautiful looking man. He's got the blonde hair, he's chiseled. Name, Mantle. Mantle comes out of the earth, and Joe is on his way out. 1951 World Series is where things really get testy for Mickey. There's a fly ball hit to right center field, and Mickey is running like the wind, trying to catch up with the ball. He trips over a sprinkler, tears up his knee. He always felt that DiMaggio loafed on the ball, and that's what he was running hard, and he didn't see the sprinkler, and that tore up his knee, and he was hurt because of that. DiMaggio was just jealous. Mantle and DiMaggio did not like each other. I'll give you a quick story. Old Timers Day in the 1980s, and Steinbrenner is going crazy because Mickey wants to be the last one introduced, and Joe is the one that's always introduced last. And George is paying these guys $125,000 each to be there that day. He bought them off. And Mickey is in a drunken stupor somewhere in this hotel. He decides he's going back to Dallas. He's not going to be there. And George is livid, absolutely livid that Mickey stiffed him. All because he felt he should have been announced last, not DiMaggio. Dick Cavett asked Paul Simon, why didn't you use DiMaggio's name? Simon said, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. The other variation of the story is that Simon told Mickey Mantle does not sound as good as Joe DiMaggio in the scheme of things. Paul made it up to Mickey eventually. He did his greatest hits album, And on the Me and Julio down by the schoolyard video, Mickey is batting left-handed down at the schoolyard. There's Terry Cashman, my old buddy. Terry and I share the same periodontist in Riverdale, New York. Terry is now working on Jim Croce's not a tribute album to Jim Croce, greatest box set of Jim Croce, because he was Jim Croce's producer before Jim was killed in a plane crash. But Terry became the balladeer of baseball. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, talking baseball, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Terry had played 2 years of minor league baseball as a pitcher in the Detroit Tigers organization back in the early 1960s. And this picture actually is kind of incomplete because it's Duke Snyder, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays, and Mickey Mantle. Willie between Joe and Mickey. And Joe is airbrushed out because he's not in the song, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Probably happier that way. It's a 1981 song, and Cashman would end up writing talking baseball songs for virtually every team in Major League Baseball in the 1980s. And there's the Scooter, Phil Rizzuto. Everybody asks me, say something funny. I'm not funny. I don't know how to say anything funny. Meatloaf. He's got a gold record, Phil, and he's also in Baseball's Hall of Fame. Not too many people can say that. Now, I knew Meatloaf down here in Westchester because his daughters played softball down here in Westchester at CM. And also I knew him from a couple of other things. And we were talking one day about Paradise by the Dashboard Light, the song that Scooter is on, and the gold medal, the gold record is Bat Out of Hell. And Scooter is asked in Boston if he can go up anyway, Terry Cashman, no. Terry Cashman, that's not his real name. Terry Cashman is not related to Brian Cashman. Terry changed his name. And then he had Cashman and West, and then he became a producer. Anyway, so Scooter is up in Boston, and Jim Steinman and Meatloaf are there, and he is supposed to be Phil Rizzuto, just talking about, just doing play-by-play. The record, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, is about a guy and a girl. And basically, let me see how I do this, the G-rated version of this. The guy wants to befriend the girl in a certain way, and the girl is certainly unsure whether or not she wants to accept his friendship. And says, will you love me forever? Will you love me forever? Will you love me forever? So Meatloaf, and he gets on the first, and he's rounding in the second, gets to third base, the suicide squeeze is on, and Rizzuto is supposed to do the narration. They've done about 100 takes, and he is not being Phil Rizzuto. I guess he's like Steinbrenner. In fact, mother thought he was an actor. And they finally sit down and say, Phil, just be Phil. Don't read the script. Just be Phil. And he was. And after about 100 takes, they finally got the one that they wanted. And so Scooter, his kids are going to Boston at the time, or in Boston at the time, going to college. One of his kids says, hey, Dad, you know that song's about sex. And Huckleberry, he lied to me. He didn't tell me it was about that. This from a guy who was once on with Bill White. I knew Bill White as well. And they're talking baseball. And Bill White's talking about the pitcher out there. And he says, Scooter, says, he's got a good rhythm. And Scooter says, Cora and I use the rhythm method. Scooter. Bill White used to visit him regularly at the senior residence in New Jersey that he was in. And so did Yogi. Yogi used to go there 3-4 times a week. And they were both very, very upset watching the end of Phil Rizzuto because both of them loved Phil Rizzuto, White and Barrett. Baseball cards. Now, I'm going to ask this question. Oh, wait a second. Did any of you have your mother throw out your baseball cards? And do you think you lost a fortune of money? I'll wait to see if anybody comes up to chat, because I was at the Montville Library about 2 years ago doing this talk during the World Series. And this guy says to me, I graduate high school and I have to do my 2 years in the Army. So my mother decides to clean my room. This is in the 1950s. I'm away for 2 years, so she felt that she could clean my room. So I come home on leave. You know, I got a couple of weeks off. And the first thing I do is I look for my baseball cards. I said, Mom, where are my baseball cards? Oh, I threw them out. You what? I threw them out. I didn't think you needed them anymore. You what? He estimates it was about $65,000, $70,000 worth of baseball cards that she threw out. The baseball cards. I got a sad story about baseball cards. I was in third grade, 1963-64, 1964, and I'm in third grade. Miss Charles is my teacher, and Miss Charles was mean. She took my baseball cards away. Took my baseball cards away along with everybody else's baseball cards. She kept them. This is about, let's see, that was what, 57 years ago? So let's say about 45 years later, I'm giving a talk at a senior residence in Roseland, New Jersey. And I start moaning about my baseball cards. And there's a woman sitting in the front row, and she's slinking into her seat. And I look at her, and I said, you're not Mrs. Charles, are you? Miss Charles, are you? And she looks at me and she says, I had to do it. She doesn't even say yes or no. She just has to do it. I said, do what? I had to keep the baseball cards. I said, what? You had to keep the baseball cards? Yeah. I said, why? Well, I was going out with a guy. And he had a 6-year-old son. And I wanted the 6-year-old son to like me. I said, hold on a second. Look at that picture. Topps baseball cards. Cy Berger is the father of the modern baseball card. Topps baseball cards. Says 5 cents. You used to get 5 cards for 5 cents, plus the bubble gum, which actually had the texture of a wooden floor that you put in your mouth and you bit down on it, which is why periodontists and oral surgeons to this day love Cy Berger, because that bubble gum wasn't real bubble gum. It was a piece of wood that you put in your mouth and chomped on and broke your teeth. She said, yeah, I had to do it. I said, so you're depriving a 7- and 8-year-old kid of his baseball cards because you want to impress a 6-year-old. It's a nickel. 5 cards. Bubble gum. I said, what happened? He broke up with me. He what? He broke up with me. What happened to the cards? I kept them. I have never gotten over that trauma. Obviously, I've never gotten over that trauma. Also, with a baseball card, you can teach somebody how to add, subtract, multiply, divide. The back of the baseball card. Add 2 at-bats and hits, then divide and get a batting average, or find out an earned run average by multiplying by 9. So you can learn all that stuff. And you can also learn geography, where a city was if you were so inclined to look at the map. Unfortunately, I'm frozen, so I cannot show you my baseball cards. But baseball cards was the first entry for some people into gambling, because you would flip the cards. You would throw the cards. You would lean the cards. You would do all kinds of things to the cards trying to win the other guy's card. And it was mostly guys, at least in my neck of the woods, because I don't remember girls collecting baseball cards, although some probably did. That was your entree to gambling. That was your first step into Las Vegas, your first step into Atlantic City, your first step in doing the scratch-off gambling games. And they made great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in and you had that whirling sound, and it was great bicycle flaps. Cy Berger invented the modern baseball card. As we wrap up here, there are not too many new songs about baseball, not too much new in literature. I do have a story about Yogi Berra and Ernest Hemingway. Dave Kaplan told me the story. Yogi is at his high with the Yankees, and Hemingway comes into the Yankee clubhouse, and everybody is lined up to meet Ernest Hemingway, and they're exchanging handshakes. Nice to meet you, nice to meet you, nice to meet you. Hemingway is introduced to Yogi. Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi says to Ernest Hemingway, hey, Ernie, what paper you work for? Kansas City Star would have been right. Baseball has just become another sport. Is Homer Simpson in the Baseball Hall of Fame? Yes or no? You could type in your chat box there, and yes or no. I'll give you about 3 seconds. If you don't type it in or nobody raises their hand, I will tell you that in 2017, Homer Simpson became a Hall of Famer because of the Springfield cartoon where his team won against the major leaguers. And there is Homer, and there is Lisa, and there is Bart, and there is Marge, and there is Maggie, and there is me. That is in Hollandale, Florida, where that picture was taken. Casey at the Bat's also in the Hall of Fame. Fogerty, John Fogerty's Center Field, the 1985 song. The League of Their Own, the movie, and of course, Abbott and Costello with the Mike Musto, Who's on First. By 1965, baseball was no longer the king of American sports. Football leaped over it. That is me on the right with that head of hair, with Joe Namath with his wig. And as my buddy Bruce Morton, Bruce doesn't have the beard anymore, from ABC Radio. Behind them, Weeb Ewbank, who is the coach of the 1968 Super Bowl champion New York Jets. And that man there, Joe Namath, single-handedly made the Super Bowl an event. Football just took off with that Super Bowl, and baseball started to backtrack by 1969. In the 1950s, in 1950 particularly, baseball, horse racing, boxing dominated American sports. All kinds of movies about baseball. Horse racing, yeah, there were movies about horses that won the Triple Crown. Boxing, there were boxing movies as well. But by 1965, football had surpassed baseball. This guy, he brought a lot of life into boxing in the 1960s, 70s, into the 80s. But once Muhammad Ali, and that's me with him in 1985, and he could not speak anymore by this point. But once Ali is out of boxing, there is the popularity of boxing would also tumble. And of course, horse racing. Horse racing was big until around 1966, and then you'd have lotteries going into stores, and you could gamble at a lot of different places, and OTB and a lot of other things happened. And they used to draw 40,000 people a night, Yonkers Raceway on a Saturday night until the 1970s. Now the raceway may be gone by next year, because the raceway only exists because there are casinos there. And according to the New York State agreement, now with MGM, formerly with the Rooney family, they had to keep horse racing through 2021. MGM bought the place, and I guarantee you they did not buy the place to keep horse racing going. That is me and Jim Bouton. Denise, you absolutely have this book in your library, Ball 4. Came out in June of 1970. Jim and I had an acquaintance, and we used to talk. We used to crisscross, speaking as well. One week, he preceded me at Ithaca College, and Jim and I used to talk about a lot of different things. The book, Ball 4, came out in June 1970, and it humanized baseball players. The baseball commissioner, Bowie Kuhn, wanted Jim to sign an agreement that nothing in his book was real, that was all fiction, and Jim said, no, not at all. And that we were finally together at the Yogi Berra Museum in 2007. The book was one of the most influential nonfiction books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library, Ball 4. And it was used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause. I was in a soccer movie in 2015. Not the baseball movie, but soccer has gotten the kids' attentions more so than baseball these days. When I was a kid, it used to be baseball morning to evening. It's not that anymore. And we will leave you with this. It ain't over till it's over. People don't go there. Nobody goes there anymore. It's talking about a restaurant in Minneapolis. Nobody goes there anymore because it's too crowded. Carmen Barrett talking to Yogi about one of their sons. Yogi, Tim went to see Dr. Zhivago today. What's wrong with him now? Joe Garagiola calls Yogi up and he says to Yogi, I'm coming to your house. What are the directions? So he starts giving him directions in Montclair. And then Yogi says, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Another Yogiism about left field in Yankee Stadium in October during World Series time. It gets late early there. Sun sets a lot earlier. And it goes on and on and on with Yogiism. You know, the future ain't what it used to be. That's another one. Deja vu all over again. But the most famous one, of course, is it ain't over until it's over. Yogi Berra has been quoted more than anybody else, as Dave Kaplan told me, more than anybody else in arguments before the Supreme Court of the United States. He's number one. So it's 1973. And the most famous of all the sayings is uttered by Yogi in Shea Stadium. Mike Dyer is a writer for the Long Island Press. Mike is now 78 years old, lives in Sarasota, Florida now. I always give him a shout out because he got this Yogi to say this. And Mike gets a kick out of it whenever I tell people the story. So it's 1973. New York Mets baseball team is not doing very well, but the New York Mets baseball team also has a lot of injuries and nobody is running away with the National League East. Somehow, Yogi's team is hanging in there. They're a couple games out and they're hanging in there, but time is running out. Yogi's team loses a game. And afterward, there's a big scrum in the managerial, in the managerial office. And Mike Dyer asks the question, Yogi, you lost today. Is it over? Yogi says, it ain't over till it's over. And there is me and Yogi and Brian Cashman, 2011, June 26, 2011. Brian and I spoke at the museum that day. It was the last time Yogi saw a talk of mine. Unfortunately, Yogi got sick, and I do miss having him at talks. It ain't over till it's over, but it's over. And I want to thank everybody for being part of the talk here today. And I am going to see, I'm going to unmute everybody here. If I can figure out how to unmute everybody. That's invite. Let's see. How does one unmute people here? I'm looking, I guess you get to the participants, and I am going to unmute everybody right now. And if you want to add anything to it, please do. As I unmute you. And
the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
Excuse me? I didn't hear what you said. Okay, I've tried to unmute everybody. Let me do that again. Any questions, any comments, any stories you might have for me?
Sounds like you're going to the Hall of Fame.
Who is that? I'm not looking. I'm trying to unmute everybody. So anyway, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Denise.
Wait, is there one here? Can you run
for inviting me. I'm sorry that I froze. But I think we had a thunderstorm that came through here. Thank you, Terry. I appreciate it. And what's the name of the soccer movie? The soccer movie I'm in is called Sons of Ben. It's been on Netflix. It was done in 2015, and it's about these crazy people in Philadelphia who wanted a Major League Soccer team and went to the ends of the earth to secure a Major League Soccer team. And if you see the movie, you will understand how these people, they will tell you in the movie that they went totally overboard to get the movie. And I'm in that movie. I did a talk at Widener University in 2008. They brought me in, and you could look up me in Widener University from 2008. They brought me in. I did the talk, and the talk was about whether or not it was economically feasible for Chester, Pennsylvania. to build a stadium, and I said no, and that caused all kind of chain reaction where I got banned at Widener from ever speaking again because I didn't tell them what they wanted. And in 2012, I got a call from a guy by the name of Jeff Bell, and he said that, hey, we want you in this movie. And so they did the movie. It took them a little while to get financing for the rest of the movie to finish it off, but they did finish it. And I am juxtaposed with the Pennsylvania governor, Ed Rendell, talking about whether or not it was a movie or not. It was a good move. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. From Francis, if you had to pick one baseball player as the most important in American history from a cultural perspective, who would you choose? Me, I'm a little biased. It had to be Yogi. But the most important guy was the Babe. I mean, a number of years ago, Baseball Hall of Fame asked people to rate the best 100 baseball players of all time, and they said, "You don't worry about number one, just from 2 to 100. It's the Babe." I mean, the Babe in the 1920s. It was Jack Dempsey. It was Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino, Al Jolson. He was among that group. That transformed baseball. And also, he was more than just a baseball player. Babe Ruth was a genuine 1920 celebrity with Rudolph Valentino and the others as well. Red Grange was in that too. But Valentino, Al Jolson, Jack Dempsey, the heavyweight champion, the Babe, they were all up there. And it was Jack Dempsey that actually wasn't Babe, but Babe helped. It was Jack Dempsey that was the radio experiment with David Sarnoff. And Sarnoff decided to put up money to do the Carpentier-Dempsey fight in July of 1921 in Jersey City. And David Sarnoff wanted to prove that radio would work, and he did with that. But it was with Babe Ruth and the New York Yankees during the World Series, 21, 22, 23, that Sarnoff was able to get the broadcasts. And he would advertise Babe Ruth. And so it was the Babe. But, you know, I didn't know Babe. From my perspective, I mean, Yogi is the guy. Yogi was everywhere. Think of it. Yogi was everywhere in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 21st century. And I'm gonna give you a Yogi story here. One day, this is in 2009, and Barack Obama is now the president. And I'm sitting with Yogi in the museum. I say, "Yogi, you seen Obama yet?" And he says, "No." I said, "You saw Truman, right?" "Yeah." I said, "You saw Eisenhower?" "Yeah." I said, "You saw John Kennedy?" "Yeah." "You saw Lyndon Johnson?" "Yeah." "Dick Nixon?" "Yeah." And Gerald Ford? "Yeah." "And Jimmy Carter?" "Yeah." "Ronald Reagan?" "Yeah." "George Bush?" "Yeah." "Bill Clinton?" "Yeah." And George W. Bush used to have him once a month at the White House during baseball season on Friday nights, if, you know, depending on schedules. So I said to Yogi, "Has Obama invited you yet?" He says, "Well," he says, "here's the problem." I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "I got to look at my schedule and I have to free up a date so I could go down there." You know what? I believed him. I believe Yogi would have had to free up his schedule to see Barack Obama than the other way around. And that's another Yogi story. Eat the tuna fish. It's good. We just got it. I was there one day. I could go on and on about Yogi. I was at the museum one day, and the door broke. Really, the door didn't break. The handle broke on the door. And I get there, and my cousin is with me because he never met Yogi, and he's in heaven. And even though he's a Willie Mays fan. And Yogi is on one knee, and he's got a tape measure, and he's measuring the handle, and Dave Kaplan's there with him. And he says, "We'll be back. You know, we'll be back. Just wait. You know, take your cousin through the museum, and we'll be back. You know where the office is," which I did. And I'm thinking to myself, can you imagine Yogi Berra getting help at Home Depot the same way you got help at Home Depot? It's Yogi Berra. But Yogi Berra was a regular person. They went to Pathmark one day, Carmen and Yogi. Well, Carmen did, and they're in the office. And Carmen has all the groceries in the car. She's driving Yogi home, and she decides to go through the receipt. And she says on the receipt, she's looking at the receipt, and she says, Yogi, we've been overcharged for this item. Can you imagine going back to Pathmark, Yogi Berra and Carmen Berra going to the, they're going to the, the customer service area. And Yogi is complaining that he was overcharged for an item. That's the Yogi I know. So, anybody else? Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Denise for,
Thank you.
and I want to thank everybody for being here. We ran a little long, but I hope you enjoyed it. And again, thank Denise, and we'll be seeing you somewhere down the line.